you all for joining us. And this is a very special topic that we've chosen. As a nonprofit organization, it's very, very important that we, and especially given our funding sources, which are usually good bulk of our funds come from the federal government, from the county and the city locally. But we couldn't do our work without relationships with elected officials. So we're delighted that Laura Hall and Mike Ball have agreed to join us today. We're especially delighted to have Dave Hargrove, who has a major role that he plays representing a major corporation, AT&T, as their government affairs director. So this morning or this afternoon, I'd like to take the time to introduce our moderator, Dr. John Pottinger, who has been a friend and supporter of Global Ties Alabama and our previous name, International Services Council of Alabama. October will be my 10th year with this organization, and John was on the board when or came on right after I joined. And he plays a very significant role beyond his work with UAH students. He has run for their international engagement organization at UAH. For 20 years, he hosted international delegations. And in fact, the work that Global Ties Alabama does with youth ambassadors from around the world is a result of the confidence that John had in Global Ties. And he facilitated a contract that UAH had to Global Ties, and we're indebted to him, and it's one of our niche programs. I'd also like to share with you that in 2010, a decade ago, John had the vision for International Services Council to launch a Global Perspectives Institute. That was our first. And when I came on board, all of the topics had to do with the space industry. Those of you who know me know that that would not be enough for Jackie. And so we've broadened the topics that we work on. We've also expanded. So we have launched GPIs across the state on university campuses. I would be remiss today if I didn't take the opportunity to publicly acknowledge John Pottinger for his vision and his spirit of collaboration. And I don't think you might be able to see this. I don't know, Jacob, if you can allow me to show this, but we have a gift for John, even though he's working from home. And so we want to thank him for his just exquisite support, confidence, and commitment to international engagement, not only in the academic setting, but nonprofits and across the cities of the state of Alabama. So John, I will turn it over to you as our moderator. And again, we just want to thank you for your support.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And I can tell you, this isn't, I would have said this whether I'm getting award or whatever that is or not. But Jackie has taken Global Ties Alabama before, when it was International Services Council, I don't know, 3, 4, 10 levels above where it was. And it wasn't bad where it was, but she has really taken this and run with it. And it's been tremendous, Jackie. You've done an incredible job. And I know you've had the best staff assisting you, but it takes your leadership to pull all this together and bring in State Department and other affiliates to make this thing work. And it's been working, so
thank you.
Quite impressive. And I do see people I know. Wanda Gale, hello. Let's see, Carol Branham, you probably don't, or Cindy, I mean, you probably don't remember me, but when you were at UH, Kenny Anderson, we've talked a couple times here and there. Looks like Yalitza's there. And I'm not sure the rest. Oh, Olga, hello, Olga. And Jacob, we've met. So a few faces I've seen before.
Hi, John. I do remember you. I was glad to see that you were going to be moderating today.
Goes way back, I think, but yeah, I've been around quite a while. So. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce the three individuals, the speakers for this GPI. I guess it's section 1, part 1 of this webinar. And we have two, I'm not sure if Mike Ball is here yet, but we have 3 individuals who've agreed to be here, and I'd like to introduce the Honorable Laura Hall. She is the representative in the House of Representatives for the state in Montgomery of District 19. And I believe, Laura, if I'm not mistaken, that this is your 3rd term in office. So
I've had a few.
Yes, congratulations on those re-elections.
Thank you.
I will, I'd like to introduce the other 2, and then I'll give each of them a chance to say something regarding this topic, and we'll take it from there. So thank you, Representative Hall, for being here. The second one is the Honorable Mike Ball, also a representative in the Alabama House of Representatives. He represents the 10th district, and I believe he's in his 4th term. I may be wrong about that. And I do want to point out that in as much as these kinds of activities bring in lots of different points of view, Representative Hall is a Democrat and Representative Ball is a Republican. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Dave Hargrove. He's the Regional Director of the Governmental and External Affairs Office for AT&T, and has been there since 1998. Some of you who go back as far as I do remember when he was on WAAY TV as an anchor with his lovely wife, Liz Hurley. So I believe what the 2 representatives bring to this will be their sense of policy making and representation of their constituents, among other things, of course. And I believe what Dave Hargrove brings to this is as well policy making, but coming from the private sector. And of course, in his role as liaison with, I take it, the state legislature anyway, that all of these 3 individuals have something to say about where those overlap and to what degree it's possible to build an agenda of mutual support. I might have a few things to say about that later, but I think you're here to hear from our guest speakers. So I'd like to turn a few minutes over to Representative Hall to see if she would like to make some comments about this topic and suggestions or anything else you'd like to say. Representative Hall. Maybe she can't hear me.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so much for this opportunity. I must say that my work with Global Ties has certainly been enjoyable and inspiring, and the opportunity to share my experiences as a legislator with the different visitors that Jackie has brought to Alabama, that have come to Alabama, has certainly been an excellent opportunity for me. So when we think about building an agenda of mutual support, I would tell you at this point, I am very hopeful as we look at the challenges that are being placed before us based on actions and protests that are going on during this time. And I am hopeful about the opportunity of building an agenda, because I've had the opportunity to have other legislators who are on the other side of the aisle, I call them Republicans, who are on the other side of the aisle, say, listen, I'm thinking about you. I'd like to know what can we do? What can we talk about? How can we make a difference? And I think part of that, I have always been an individual who believes that the work that you do speaks for itself. And one of the best thing that you can do is to be honest and straightforward and never waffle in terms of what your position is. And even if sometimes that's an unpopular thing to do, but if you're known for taking those kinds of stands, even when your party is no longer in the leadership, I find that there are opportunities to build a bridge and work. If we're allowed to do it as individuals, now if it's allowed to be done from a party perspective, that challenge is a lot greater. And so I find that because of that, that requires a lot more conversations, a lot more preparing, a lot more interactions, and being deliberate about our activities. So that is my opening statement that I would make as it relates to this topic, working to build an agenda for mutual support. Because when we look at the climate that exists today, if we are not able to do that, we are going to continue to face the challenges that are in front of us. Thank you.
There, found it. Thank you, Representative Hall. I'd like to make a comment on that, but I want to move next to Representative Ball. Is he here?
I don't think so.
Okay, hasn't arrived yet. Then I'd like to go to Mr. Hargrove for his comments, observations.
Thank you, John. I'm bad about not turning on or turning off my mute button. Is it off? Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
Good, good. Well, good afternoon, and Jackie, thank you for inviting me. Jackie has a telecommunications background. It's part of her varied professional background, and she and I have talked a lot over the years about our industry and how much it changes and how much it has changed. I am a registered lobbyist in the state of Alabama, and I don't go around the street yelling that, because I think the term lobbyist to many have kind of a negative connotation. Some of that is deserved, I believe, but basically what a lobbyist does is represents the interests of the company that employs them. And I think that becomes problematic if you work for a company that is in conflict with your value system. And fortunately, I've worked for almost 23 years now with a company that is very much in keeping with my personal value system. I believe what we do is very important. We try to connect people to quote our vision, wherever they live, work, or play, and attempt to do that better than anyone else. And like everything that human beings get their hands on, I think you can find nefarious and not so polite things to do with mobile devices and other communication devices, but I think by and large, we benefit greatly from them with education, with the interpersonal relationships that we have with friends and family. Jackie and I were talking about my son who lives out in Southern California. We probably communicate now more and about more substantive quality things than we did when he lived under our roof. Now, I don't know how that speaks to my ability as a parent, but I think if you use these technologies the way they're really intended, they can be tremendously beneficial. And my role with AT&T is with not only the state legislature and great leaders like Representative Hall and Representative Ball, but I also work with municipalities and counties in the northern 22 counties in Alabama, and that's roughly 140 something municipalities there. So it's a lot of ground to cover. It's a lot of people to try and build relationships with. And I try to do the best I can to do what Representative Hall was talking about earlier, and that is establish this mutual trust, be respectful of each other's time, be respectful of each other's goals and priorities. And I will tell you that her job in the legislature is much, much tougher than mine. Every legislative session will come down to Montgomery and we'll have anywhere from 2 to 5 topics that are just the most important things in the world to AT&T. But at the same time, while I'm trying to juggle those 2 to 5 issues and know as much of them as possible, Representative Hall and Representative Ball may have 300 to 500 topics that they have to know something about, and they have to know enough about to vote on and make decisions on behalf of their constituents. So that's a much tougher job and a much taller order than I have to deal with my 2 to 5 topics for a for-profit company, one of the largest in the world. But I don't have to know that much, and Representative Hall doesn't have to know everything about everything, but she's got to know a good amount about hundreds of topics and has to find some way to prioritize and juggle those. And many of those topics don't find their way to the floor. Many of those topics aren't resolved within a legislative session. And my hat's off to her and to Representative Ball for being able to do that term after term. That's all I have, John, to open.
Thank you very much. The rest of you don't mind, I'd like to ask a question for the 2 speakers. Hopefully Representative Ball will show up and be able to contribute to this as well. And all of you, as you hear the responses, at least of Representative Hall and Mr. Hargrove. And that is something that Laura Hall brought up in her statement. Again, as a nation, we're going through a lot of introspection. Hopefully it's not just retrospection. Thinking about problems of systemic racism or institutionalized racism, questions of race relations in nearly every setting we can think of. So my question is this, not asking for solutions beyond those of honest discussion that people of goodwill throughout the country, I believe, will have. And that is, how could Global Ties Alabama and the activities that under Jackie's leadership she has done, but looking forward to activities that she will be doing, not to put all this on you, Jackie, but that she will be organizing for GTA in the state of Alabama. How could her activities further a profitable, not in the money sense, but a profitable discussion on race relations in the state of Alabama? I'll leave it there, but asking both Representative Hall and Mr. Hargrove if you have some thoughts on that, as you understand, because I know both of you have been greatly involved with Global Ties Alabama, and you may have some ideas of how those activities, and as we as a nation and as a state try to sort out, take major steps forward in our relations with each other, either personal level, political level, private sector level, doesn't matter.
For me, I think the one thing that I think Global Ties could do to help to advance the discussion for as it relates to racism. One of the things that has happened, it appears each time that we've had a delegation that I've had an opportunity to interact with, in many cases, they have issues very similar to ours. Think of the last guest that Jackie brought, the young lady that talked about the issues of women's rights. And so the issues are the same, but I think sometimes if we could have a discussion maybe between legislators in a more public setting so other individuals get to see and share those experiences, and then how, in many ways, how we work at making a difference in the problems that is before us based on what they are doing. For me, that would be another way of showing that you're not in this alone, and it's this problem that exists with us in terms of systematic racism, the issue of racism, period, is not something that we're going to be able to get rid of in one day, 1 year. It has to be a process that we're working strategically together to change things. And when you look at even the demonstrations that are occurring around the world, it's not just in Alabama, it's not just the United States, but around the world. So I think having an opportunity to share conversations between the two organizations, nationally, internationally, we can certainly show that we can make a difference, and individuals can see that difference, even though you may be serving in a public or in an official office or legislative office.
I'd like to piggyback on what Representative Hall just shared. Because of the accessibility that she and Representative Ball and several others at the state level have allowed to grow in the relationship with Global Ties Alabama, I joke a lot and say I have them on speed dial. And we had the person that she's alluding to that came in March was a woman of courage from Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And she was named a woman of courage. There were 12 of them that were selected by the White House to come to the US in March. And this woman, little tiny woman who really focused on the issue of nonviolence in working against the Assad regime and how they took her brothers and son and imprisoned them and eventually killed them. When we took this woman first to the Rosa Parks Museum, and not knowing or realizing she was also a history teacher, her tears were so vivid because she said it was Martin Luther King's nonviolent strategy that influenced her as a leader today. She's 42 years old, and Rosa Parks was 42 years old when she refused to leave the bus. Laura Hall, just because of an email intro that we sent to her, arranged for this woman to meet the House Speaker as well as to present to the entire House of Representatives. That would never have happened if Jackie and Global Ties had sent in a request. It was because of a relationship, a level of confidence. And when the woman spoke, and she rehearsed it the night before at one of our board members who happens to be on the call, Al Allenback, he and his wife coached her because her English was not as fluent as she wanted it to be. But when she stood in front of the House of Representatives, she was determined to speak to them in English. And she received a standing ovation, and Jackie was in shock. Because I know the politics and the political stances of a number of our elected officials who might not have publicly shown an interest in having anyone in their midst from Syria. But Laura Hall, I can't tell you the difference that you made, not only in our confidence as an organization in what we do, but this woman left this country influenced to go back and to do more in her nonviolent leadership role. So I want to publicly thank you and use that as an example.
Thank you.
I think if I could offer something here, it's to follow up on what Representative Hall was talking about. You know, this year 2020 has been a very humbling year for the United States of America. Watching Jackie and her organization over the years and bringing people from around the world together, I think she's demonstrated the type and modeled the type of humility we need to spread out to the rest of this country. You know, between the how we have handled the pandemic in this country, the mere fact that we have been scolding other countries in the world about human rights for so long, with what has been going on with relationship between the races in this country for decades and decades and hundreds of years. We really have no right to be scolding any other country about human rights. So, you know, we've talked about how this whole series of unfortunate incidents involving the deaths of Black men at the hands of police officers, the recent events and the recent demonstrations, how we feel like things are different now. That we're seeing this as a momentum we've never felt before because of the global reach of the protests, because the conversation isn't going away after a few days. The fact that with my company, AT&T, our CEO, who just recently retired but is serving, he's chairing the business roundtable of CEOs who are looking at police reform throughout the United States, and the fact that before he left, and his successor, John Stankey, our new CEO, have told us this is not an issue that is going to fade or that we're going to address in a superficial, words-only manner. So I've received no less than 3 or 4 emails a week updating employees of our company about what we're doing to act and move forward on police reform and on race relations in the United States. So I'm proud to be involved with a company that's doing that. Proud to know Jackie and to be invited to this event with her organization. I just think humility and bringing other countries together, that maybe we're not doing everything better than everyone in the world. And I think sometimes we get a little extreme with our patriotism. I'm a patriotic person, but I'm patriotic about the country that I want this country to be. And I think we all want this country to be. And this year has not been a good year for the United States.
I'd like to open this to other participants here, other views you may have, suggestions.
Hey, this is Al, and for Dave, listen, when all this COVID stuff clears, let's you and me have a drink down at the Aviator Bar in Montgomery sometime.
Sounds good.
This is for Representative Hall. You know, what we're doing here today is really discussing how can global ties, Alabama, get its message more clearly and more forcefully to the legislature as a whole. I've been involved in a couple organizations that we've done hosted breakfasts. We've put up, you know, displays down in the State House when the legislature's in session. For Representative Hall, what do you think is most effective for an organization like GTA to get its message and mission in front of your peers?
Well, I really think that I'll take the last visit that we had with Global Ties. It's very hard, and the reason I say this, it is very hard to get legislators to focus on very much of anything once we're in Montgomery. People like Dave Hargrove, a lobbyist, is pulling on your coat one way. You have another lobbyist pulling your coat another way. You have 3 or 4 committee meetings going on. And so focusing on a group that's in the area, it is a challenge at best. I may have good intentions of coming by your table, but something is going to come up. Somebody's going to call a committee meeting, or I've called a meeting for some issue. So I tell you, the challenge is really great.
How to join a Zoom meeting.
I'm sorry. So, and so I think you have to be strategic in planning that kind of activity to make sure you get the very best. Now, we will come to a meal in many cases, if it's at the time that is convenient. We will do that. And if you have a reception with some really good food, some of us will show up for that too. So that gives you a chance to interact. But if you really wanted to, I have to agree with Jackie, the last event that with the woman from Syria, it was just timing. It was a little planning. It was done beforehand. It allowed me an opportunity to reach out to the leadership to make sure things happen. So when you're planning to do those kinds of activity, it is good to speak to your legislative delegation member, whoever your representative is, or whoever is working with you, to make sure that you have some attention, somebody that is going to listen to what you're trying to say. Because if it's longer than a half a page, we're probably not going to give you much attention if we're in session.
Got it. Thank you, ma'am.
Kenny, you must have some ideas about this. If he's still listening. Yalitza, you must have some ideas about this.
So many, but I do have a question. I don't know if some of my ideas are good for this setting, but if Ms. Hall, if you could speak on how we can move things from the conversation stage to the action stage. I know this is a really complicated question, but with our state legislators, what seems to be the best method, or how does a group or individuals or a coalition get from the conversation part to the action part more easily, in the best way? I think you know what I'm asking.
So it really does depend on what that issue is. And so I'll give you a couple that's on the front right now with individuals. The Confederate monuments, or the Confederate symbols that are on the patches of the state troopers. That to me, it should be a simple process. But that most people think you can just say, okay, Governor, remove that Confederate flag from the patch. Well, there's a statute that says that's the way the patch is done, because it's the state's coat of arms. So then we have to file a bill and make sure that bill is introduced. And then from there, making sure that you have individuals that are going to be, that you have enough of individuals that's going to support you, that you can get it out of committee on the floor for discussion and pass, and also hopefully have the governor to sign it. That sounds like it's real simple, but it's a matter of that conversation. You can't let your conversation, I tell individuals, even with your protest, if you're protesting about something and you don't have an action that's going with that protest, that you want to follow it all the way through, you are really, in many cases, wasting your time. once that protest is over, what is the next step that you're going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to meet with your legislator? Are you going to ask your legislator to sponsor the bill or co-sponsor the bill? Are you going to make sure that when the bill is introduced, that you're going to encourage others to get engaged in that process, speak to their legislators? It is that kind of process that starting now by January, when we go in February, there may be some momentum that you'd say in the first week or two, you have some of those things. Those are small things, small bites. And you may have some other ideas of things that you want to work on. But for me, that is what I see that is important. It can't be something that is mentioned and left on the side and expected to take feet and start moving on its own. It really, in most cases, will not.
Representative Hall, there's a question on the chat about what's the likelihood of there being a special session this fall dealing with health matters, including coronavirus?
My pay grade doesn't allow me to have any answers for that. I can't even begin to tell you. There's been talk about a special session, and that is all I've heard is talk. Dave may have a better feel as a lobbyist. He may have heard something more definitive than I have.
I have not, Laura, or Representative Hall. I haven't heard anything definitive about that. I know that there are some issues that weren't addressed during the regular session that I think a lot of the sponsors of bills would like to have it addressed sometime in 2020, but I've heard nothing hinting strongly of when and if that might happen.
Right.
I have a question for Jackie. When I look at the title of this webinar, Building an Agenda of Mutual Support, that's part of the title. I wonder to what extent, and whether it's the topic of issues of inequality, race, police actions, whatever it may be, to what extent would this mutual support bring GTA into being a political actor, an advocate for something? I'm guessing there's a line somewhere there between being politically active as a group beyond just, aside from or as a part of bringing in individuals like the Syrian woman and others to learn from us and we to learn from them. I just wonder about that connection.
Yeah, good.
Not individually, of course, we can all write letters, protest, march, we can do all that. But maybe as a group, I don't know.
Yeah, so we are technically a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which prohibits us from lobbying, so to speak. But there's no reason why we cannot communicate with our elected officials. And we feel that it shouldn't be just emails or letters clarifying what we would like to see our elected officials do. We think it is so much more important for the engagement, like with Laura Hall. We had about a year and a half ago, a delegation from Mexico, and the focus was on professionalizing law enforcement in Mexico. So we had a delegation of about a dozen police officers from Mexico. We were one of the cities that they were selected to come to and interact with our law enforcement agencies, our elected officials. Mike Ball, because of his background in law enforcement, was one of the presenters. So allowing our elected officials to be a part of what we do, the benchmarking that these countries do when they come here to engage and learn how American systems are working, I think we all know that some of our systems are broken, that we can actually learn from some of our other country fellows. We actually had another delegation from Europe that came, and it was again on policing, community policing. And we have just had some letters sent to elected officials outlining some of the remedies that these visitors put into action from learning in the US and going back and implementing in their countries. Last month, we were able to have our first virtual exchange where we had a dozen legal professionals, lawyers from a dozen different African countries. They were all French-speaking countries, and they were in the US and then had to cut their trip short, so they never got to Alabama. And our partner in DC wanted them to have that experience. And so we were able to virtually introduce them to the Equal Justice Initiative. The date that that was to take place was in the midst of the George Floyd issues that were resulting in the protests, et cetera. And I had a special conversation with our colleagues in DC. Do not think that they're going to come here and not ask us questions about what's going on. So let's be very proactive and transparent, because the eyes are on the US and they want to learn and understand, how can we call ourselves the New South if we're having issues that continue from decades and generations ago. So it's consistent learning for both sides, our visitors who come, for us as an organization, and then we have a responsibility to engage with our with our elected officials. I also want to take this opportunity to appreciate AT&T. Now, Dave is not going to be real happy about what I'm about to say, because for years, AT&T had a calendar that was dedicated to profiling African Americans in the state. That was a tool for Global Ties Alabama to actually give to our visitors, but to also give to our local schools. And we would have a Black History exhibit at the Madison County Courthouse, and that was one of the featured items. I haven't received one for 2020. I suspect that it might not have continued, and I don't want anybody to think it's superficial, because we have a responsibility to teach our children everyone's history. I learn so much when our visitors come. And even though I was a history major, I was a product of American schools, so I didn't learn everything I should have. And so continuous learning is one of our values as an organization, and I'm hopeful that Dave Hargrove can influence his organization to bring back that calendar.
Sounds like
Well,
you're
I'll tell you if I can respond. First off, most of what you said I really liked. The latter part, I don't believe we're producing the calendar anymore, but we did divert those energies and those funds to another project that began in the bicentennial celebration, where we produced a book, which I'll work on getting you a copy of. One of the nicest volumes I've ever seen of its type, that profiled African American role models throughout Alabama's history in a really comprehensive way. So let me get you a copy of that, and I will also ask about the calendar, because we love the calendar too.
Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Representative Mike Ball.
Yay!
He's here, or at least says so on the screen. Representative Ball, have you gotten a sense of what we've been discussing? And
well, I just joined late, and I just listening in.
We've been discussing how Global Ties Alabama can work with, and I know I'm not using the correct language here, Jackie, but be a part of the discussion, at least statewide and clearly internationally for that matter, on matters of importance to our society as it's going through this transition. I think it'll be a transition. I may be wrong. But going through this discussion on race relations, on institutionalized biases, prejudices, and as a society to live up to its founding values, in my mind, regardless of who said those values, that we say we wish to aspire to. And so we've gone back and forth, not back and forth, that sounds too negative. We've been discussing both substantive issues as well as GTA's, Global Ties Alabama, and its ability to and has been augmenting discussion on many of those issues. So from your perspective, Representative Ball, and I know you've been doing a lot with Global Ties Alabama as well, you see, or maybe you could say a little more about how you see GTA's influence present in Alabama politics, or not quite politics, but at least present, its influence with representatives of Alabama government and what's going on here.
Well, I think Global Ties Alabama has an opportunity to in this discussion in a major way. And one of the things I know that Jackie is aware. I noticed Laura Hall, Representative Hall, is on the phone too. And you know, I think in Alabama, I know it's easy to talk about everything that's wrong, but in Alabama, I think a lot of these battles that we had to fight a few decades ahead of the rest of the country, maybe it was forced on us, and I think that there are some opportunities for racial dialogue that we, certainly legislators, many of us, we already have, and I think there's some lessons that we've already learned that on getting along, and that the rest of the country, not that we're where we need to be, but I see a lot of these battles and a lot of these things that are like what's going on in Minneapolis, a lot of this stuff with the use of force. We still have some issues that we need to work out, but I know through my ABI career, I saw where we were and I saw where we are, and I can see where we're heading. If the question is, how do we get there the best way? I think Global Ties Alabama has relationships with all of the players here in Alabama, and can really make some major progress in bringing folks together and improving communications. And there are some things we're doing better in Alabama than far better than we have in past years.
Thank you. Jackie, do we still have time for other questions or comments?
Sure, one or two more, sure.
All right, anybody else like to make a comment?
Yeah, hi. My name is Michael Wells, and I'm a new member of Global Ties. And I just, first of all, let everyone know that I very much have enjoyed this discussion. I've recently have resettled here in Alabama for a couple months and have joined Global Ties. And I must say this, that Jackie is truly an angel. And I think that everybody concurs with that, but I just want to reiterate that. And also would like to say the words of what the Honorable, the two representatives said, and also Mr. Hargrove said, coming from a business leader to know what, because when big business gets behind something, things start to change. It helps with the big momentum. And to have heard his comments with what he said, what he and AT&T are doing, and if that's the big push that, global America is making, I think we're headed in the right direction. And I just wanted to make that comment that I very much appreciated what everyone is saying. And I'm proud to be a member of Global Ties. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thoughts, comments? All right, Jackie, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank you, certainly, John, for moderating. I'd like to thank our panelists, Laura Hall and Dave Hargrove and Mike Ball. And from what Mike Ball said at the end, he always has a way of giving me more work to do. And so I'm hearing GTA taking the lead in perhaps having forums to encourage dialogue between people of difference. That's what we do. We don't always limit it to racial difference. I've been in the it started out as diversity and inclusion work for many years. And even though there's new language, implicit bias, and it all boils down to how can we learn how to respect the differences of one another. And so it would be an honor for Global Ties Alabama, since respect is one of our core values, to help promote that. We've already been in some dialogue with Kenny Anderson's office, and if we can do this throughout the state, we will find a way to get it done so that I can always be able to call on Mike Ball and Laura Hall. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Just as a preview, next week we'll be looking at advocacy from a federal level, and we look forward to having speakers from the U.S. Global Leadership Council, as well as the state director for Doug Jones's Alabama team. So please join us again at 1:30 next Tuesday, and thank you for your continued support of Global Ties Alabama.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I made it back.
Thank you. What are you doing? Are you taking a minute?